Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing okay. Today I thought I'd try and do something a little different. I'm going to do a weekend reading update, and it's mainly because recently I've felt that I've been having to rush through my monthly wrap-ups, and so I thought I'd just do a bit of an informal update, just as and when I feel like it. It seems like this kind of loose kind of weekend update is kind of superseded Friday reads. And when I first started making videos, I did make Friday reads videos, and I just felt like I was constantly repeating myself, because sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 weeks when I was reading a really long book and I didn't really have anything to say, so I was just making them for the sake of making them. So instead, we're just going to have updates as and when I feel like it, and they'll kind of supplement my wrap-up videos. It gives me a bit more time to talk about each book. I should also mention I'm in a bit of a new location. We've cleared up some space upstairs here, and I'm hoping that this room will become a bit of a library, a book room. And so eventually there's going to be some new bookshelves there, so that most of the books in the house will be in here. So it'll be a bit more of an interesting background in a little while. But on to this week's books. So this week has been fairly productive. I've finished 4 books, and I think 2 of them I finished kind of in the midweek, and then I finished one last night. That was Friday night, and another I just finished this morning. So the first book I finished this week, still getting into the new format. The first book that I finished this week was Plato's Republic. I've been reading this for a couple of weeks, and it's just one of those books that has had so much of an influence on other books, but also just on, I suppose, just Western philosophy and politics generally. And the impetus for me to read this was watching Gareth from Books, Songs and Other Magic, talking about philosophy and some of the sort of foundational books for him, I suppose, and sort of making recommendations for places to start and things like that. And I'd had this for a little while. I bought this earlier this year with the intention to read it eventually, and so he kind of gave me the push I needed to get into it. And it's essentially an inquiry into what justice is and what a just person would look like. And to do that, Socrates and his friends, or just the people who are around that he's talking with, they decide that the way to do this is to sort of systematically put together an ideal just society, on the sort of presumption that then if you zero in on one person from this just society, all of the elements that make up that city will be found inside that person, and then we found what a just person looks like, and then to find what an unjust person looks like, you just look at the opposite. So that's roughly what's going on, and I think when people talk about it, and also when they're talking about it in the book, just the idea of creating this ideal society, you kind of run away with that idea, and sort of constantly through this, they're kind of reminding themselves that, oh wait, we're actually trying to hone this in so we can talk about the individual, not just imagine a city. But I think, just the idea of doing that is so compelling to us, and it's inspired so much utopian fiction, or just sort of thought experiments and actual utopian societies as well. I think the main thing I took away from this was when it's actually looking at what a just person looks like in comparison to what they then decide an unjust person is like, is essentially a just person is somebody who is willing to, I suppose, have a sense of service, a sense of self-sacrifice to their life. And then the tyrant or the unjust person is essentially someone who lives completely for themselves, who is really only interested in their own happiness, quote unquote, and accumulating their own wealth or power or whatever it would be. But they find that as the unjust person is doing this, that then they can trust fewer and fewer people, and more people feel like they can't trust this unjust person. So their list of friends slowly, begins to shrink. And so actually, even though they are living for their own happiness, they don't attain happiness. All they really get is, maybe some power, maybe some wealth, but they're ultimately they can't trust anyone. They don't really have any true friends, any meaningful relationships. And so there's this sort of link between justice and happiness, and maybe the way to attain that is actually self-sacrifice rather than I don't know, sort of just living for self-gratification. So I found that really quite interesting. His ideas actually about formulating a society and stuff. I think that's where a lot of people tend to have trouble with it, and I can understand why. One of the big ones for me was the fact that he just thinks democracy is a kind of outmoded or just unnecessary form of governance, and he puts it on a sort of a spectrum or a continuum that leads towards tyranny. And I suppose the thing I thought was that although he thinks that democracy ultimately festers tyranny, and then you can't really go back from there, I think it does actually work both ways. So we can still sort of salvage a democracy in the wake of some kind of autocracy or something. But anyway, there are some of my thoughts on Plato's Republic. I don't want to ramble on too much, mainly because I'm not a political scientist or a philosopher, so there's only really so much I can say that would be coherent or useful. The next book I finished, and I wasn't really expecting to finish it so quickly, was Lupercal by Ted Hughes, a poet I quite like, one of my favourites, and I started reading this on the bus. I had like an hour-long bus journey. I meant just to read maybe a handful of poems and then move on to something else. Just found this so compelling, and the voice just so enjoyable and sort of familiar for me, because he's a poet I keep coming back to, that I just couldn't put it down. And so I just read the whole thing in one sitting on the bus. And it's got some of his strongest poems in here. It's got Pike in here. It's got a poem called Hawk Roosting, which is really good. And there's a poem in here called Woman Unconscious, which is also very good. Is it called Woman Unconscious? I'm just trying to find it. A Woman Unconscious, yeah. And yeah, I don't know, he's kind of looking at an unconscious woman in a hospital bed, presumably, I guess, after giving birth or something. And presumably that's Sylvia Plath. And I don't know, he's just sort of contrasting that with all of the fears and anxieties, I suppose, at that time in the, I think it was 1960 when he wrote this. And yeah, just the anxiety of the world contrasted with a woman asleep in a bed, and just the fact that those two things can exist. So yeah, I'm not explaining the poem very well. Maybe I'll read it for a Poetry Thursday or something at some point. But yeah, really enjoyed Lupercal by Ted Hughes. And then the two books I've literally just finished. So one I finished last night, one I finished this morning. And the book I finished last night was The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. And this is a book I've been putting off for years and years and years. And I finally got to it, and I think I can safely say that this is one of the best books that I've ever read. It gives me that same, I don't know, kind of expansive feeling, just of a really kind of deep sort of empathy that I got when reading, particularly like something like War and Peace. Trying to think of other books. Certainly reading certain Chekhov stories and things like that, and I was, it has a kind of Chekhovian feeling to it. I think it was also reminding me of sort of Dubliners era James Joyce, particularly The Dead. I think there are some sort of parallels there as well. And just a great, I think, perfect novel about high society in New York and the hypocrisy in there, and really the hypocrisy, or the I suppose the conflicting values inside one character. So our main character, Newland Archer, he's grown up in this really wealthy sort of culture in New York. They like to see themselves as aristocrats, and I suppose to all intents and purposes in New York they are aristocrats. And compared to everyone else around him, deep inside he, I suppose, is quite radical. He seems to be all for female emancipation and things like that, and he's quite radical in quite a few of his views, and yet he is really tethered to this world, and he can't really express them to anyone around him. And the way that he's ultimately tethering himself to this world of just of balls and opera and gossip is through his marriage to May, and literally on the night of his engagement to May being announced, Countess Olenska comes into his world. Is that her name? I keep on saying it. Yeah, Countess Olenska, or Eleanor, who's an old childhood friend, and it just sows initially that seed of doubt, I think, in his mind, and it kind of gives him a sense of, I think, self-consciousness about what he's doing, and it's just kind of complex, because in a way he's a terrible person because he's essentially he's just marrying someone because he knows he can just have a cozy, easy life, and just live like everyone around him, and yet deep down he knows that that's really not the life that he wants to live, and he has the possibility to maybe change that, but it's just a constant, I suppose, battle between what's expected of him, what he wants to do, and then wondering whether what he wants to do is too selfish. Again, I'm not explaining this very well, but it's, asking the question of, is he really being true to himself? Is he potentially just ruining the lives of everyone he loves as well? And it just gets me just thinking about how much can we really like this guy, our main character, because he is, in a way he just is so terrible, and yet we still really kind of feel for him, and in a way he is trapped as well, and he wants to be able to escape. So I'm not explaining it very, very well at all, but it's one of those books that just hooks you. I think Wharton's writing is just tremendous, and it's just really, really warm and inviting, and it was a really hard book to put down. So even though I haven't explained it very well, I think The Age of Innocence is probably one of the best books I've ever read. And then to finish things off, a little bit of a contrast to that, we've got the Book of Imaginary Beings by Borges, and this is a kind of almost like an encyclopedia of fantastical, mythical animals from all over the world, from all over literature. So there's stuff from Greek mythology in here, there's stuff from Chinese mythology in here. There are things from Kafka in here, there are things from C.S. Lewis, from his Paralendra, Out of the Silent Planet, which is really quite cool just to see just how much stuff Borges was reading and thinking about and enjoying, and just the kind of dots that he connects is really amazing, just the different literary and imaginative worlds. And maybe I'll read you just an entry, and this is for the Minotaur, and for some reason this kind of struck a chord with me. I will say just before I read it that it's full of these great illustrations by Peter Sees, and this whole thing is translated by Andrew Hurley, who's done quite a lot of the sort of more modern Borges translations into English. But this is Borges's entry on the Minotaur. The idea of a house built expressly so that people will become lost in it may be stranger than the idea of a man with the head of a bull, and yet the two ideas may reinforce one another. Indeed, the image of the labyrinth and the image of the Minotaur seem to go together. It is fitting that at the centre of a monstrous house there should live a monstrous inhabitant. The Minotaur, half man, half bull, was born out of the lovemaking of Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, with a white bull sent by Poseidon from the sea. Daedalus, the artificer, who built the device that allowed such a passion to be consumed, also built the labyrinth destined to house and hide the monstrous offspring. The Minotaur ate human flesh. To satisfy its hunger, the king of Crete required that Athens render Crete a yearly tribute of 7 youths and 7 maidens. Theseus resolved to save his kingdom from that terrible taxation and volunteered to go. Ariadne, the daughter of the king, gave the young man a spool of thread so that he would not become lost in the mazy corridors of the labyrinth. The hero killed the Minotaur and followed the thread out of the maze. Ovid, in an attempt at a witty turn of phrase, speaks of the man half bull and the bull half man. Dante, who was familiar with words of the ancients, but not with their coins and monuments, pictured the Minotaur with the head of a man and the body of a bull. The worship of the bull and the double-headed axe, whose name was Labris, and so might well have evolved into labyrinth, was characteristic of pre-Hellenic religions, which held sacred festivals in their honour, known as Tauromachias. To judge from murals, human figures with heads of bulls figured in Cretan demonology. Sorry, I didn't really get that sentence, but it's the last sentence here that really struck a chord for some reason. The Greek fable of the Minotaur is probably a late and somewhat uncouth version of very ancient myths, the shadow of other, still more horrific dreams. And yeah, I don't know, and I kind of recognise that feeling, but particularly it reminds me of a particular picture in a book of myths and legends that I had as a kid, and there was just a deep dread and terror whenever I saw the picture of the Minotaur, and I felt it again the first time I read that sentence, and it's just that idea that our monsters, yes, we sort of populate them from the natural world. They're nearly always made out of different parts of different animals, but ultimately they come from our dreams and from our unconscious and from our fears. and we, then our myths and our stories are the shreds, are the remnants of those dreams. So I found that really, really fascinating, and it's got some cogs turning, and I'm not exactly sure where that train of thought will go. But there we go, that's my reading update for this week. I think that's pretty much all I've been reading. I might have read a little bit of Proust here and there as I'm slowly making my way through. But there we go, that was an unexpectedly productive reading week. So yeah, please let me know how you've been getting on, what you've been reading, what you've been enjoying, or what you've been grappling with, or maybe if you're reading something that you're just dreading to pick up every day. Yeah, let me know. But I hope you're doing really well, and I'll see you soon. Bye.